Hi everybody, and welcome to Lovefraud Live. So we discover that our romantic partner is a complete and utter fake, and we wonder how in the world we could ever fall for a con artist. I'm Donna Andersen, author of Lovefraud.com, and I personally did this. Tonight I'll explain 5 reasons why we fall for con artists. As always, I'll answer your questions at the end of this short presentation. So to join the chat or ask a question, please be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. So, the proclamations of love, the stories about his or her past, nothing was true. All the money that our partner desperately needed or promised would buy a life of luxury for the two of us, well, that all evaporated into expensive and unnecessary toys. Or our money financed a secret life with one or more other lovers, aka targets. I know about that one too. When it finally sinks in that we've been totally conned, the first question we ask ourselves is, how could I have been so stupid? Followed by, why didn't I see this coming? Feeling like chumps, we come down really hard on ourselves. But we aren't the only ones who are blind to the social predators living among us. Our entire society is blind. The fact that millions of sociopaths live among us is a giant skeleton in the closet of the human race that nobody wants to talk about. This sets us up to be victimized. It's one of the reasons why we fall for con artists. Sociopathic con artists take advantage of our collective and individual blindness. With the skill that comes from practicing their craft from a very young age, they manipulate our empathy and emotions. They use us to accomplish their objective du jour, whatever it might be. So here are 5 reasons why we fall for con artists. Number 1, we don't know sociopaths exist. Most people think sociopaths are all criminals and deranged serial killers. This isn't necessarily true. Social predators live among us, and most of them never kill anyone. Still, these people have no heart, no conscience, and no remorse. Lovefraud uses the term sociopath to describe people who exploit and manipulate others. They would clinically be diagnosed as having antisocial, psychopathic, narcissistic, histrionic, or borderline personality disorders. If you add up the official estimates of people with these conditions, it's perhaps 12% of the population, 37 million people in the US. That's how many people have personality disorders that make them unsuitable to be romantic partners. And we, as a society, don't know it. Here's reason number 2. We believe people are all basically the same. In the United States, from the time we're small children, we are bombarded with messages about fairness, equal opportunity, and giving people a second chance. In school, we learn that we're all created equal. In church, we learn that we're all God's children. As a result, we believe all people are basically the same. There is good in everyone, and everyone just wants to be loved. Unfortunately, there is a segment of the population for which this simply is not true. Sociopaths view the world as predators and prey. They are the predators, and everyone else is prey. They are not motivated by love. They are motivated by power and control. These people pursue romantic relationships not for love, but for exploitation. Here's reason number 3. Humans are lousy lie detectors. Research shows that people can identify a lie only 53% of the time. That's not much better than flipping a coin. All of those signs that are supposedly giveaways that someone is lying, like looking away or failing to make eye contact, well, they simply don't apply to sociopaths. These people are expert liars. They spend their whole lives lying. They feel entitled to lie. They lie for the fun of it. In fact, there's a phenomenon called duping delight. Sociopaths get a thrill out of staring right into your eyes and pulling the wool over them. People who are not liars never see it coming. Here's reason number 4. Sociopaths hijack the normal human bonding process. Trust is the glue that holds society together. Trust is so important to the human race that it is programmed into our biology. A hormone called oxytocin is released in our brains and our bloodstream whenever we feel intimacy, whether it's emotional or physical. Oxytocin makes us feel calm, trusting, and content, and it alleviates fear and anxiety. Nature created this process to make people want to stay together to raise children. When sociopaths target us for romantic relationships, they spend a lot of time building what appears to be trust, or they rush us into emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy. Either way, they get the oxytocin flowing in our brains and bloodstream, which makes us trust them. Then they keep piling on the intimacy, and we, to our detriment, keep trusting. Finally, here's reason number 5. The betrayal bond makes it difficult to escape. Once that first love bond is in place, the sociopath does things that create fear and anxiety in us, like cheating on us or taking more and more money. Contrary to what you might expect, instead of driving us away, this actually makes the bond that we feel with the sociopath stronger. It becomes a betrayal bond, a powerful bond that we feel with someone who is destructive to us. We desperately want to return to the heady experience of the beginning of our involvement, which was filled with what we believed was love and affection. We keep waiting for the sociopath to make the situation right, but he or she never does. The exploitation continues. Betrayal bonds are highly addictive and difficult to break. That's why we stay in the relationship far longer than we should, until we can no longer escape the reality that we've been conned. So here's my message to you. When we ask ourselves why we fell for a con artist, we really should cut ourselves some slack. It's actually pretty easy. Okay, so I see we have some conversation going here. Let's take a look. Okay, so Sociopath Survivor says, my ex-sociopath was diagnosed afterward with only bipolar disorder, but I experienced all of the cluster B patterns. It was much more than that. Why do professionals never see what we do? It's so frustrating. Yes. I've mentioned before that Lovefraud did some research into this topic because what sociopath survivors said about a professional not understanding the experience. I mean, I've heard that so many times, so many times. People go to therapy and a counselor doesn't understand what they're talking about, or they want to focus on, your contribution to the problems and, what you should do to fix yourself. And it's just not helpful. And actually, my colleagues and I did some research on this, and we have a scientific paper published about the fact that many counselors, clinical professionals, really do not understand what goes on in these relationships. In fact, our research shows that about half of therapists do not understand what happens when someone is involved with a sociopath. And consequently, sometimes they actually deliver harmful therapy. It's not therapy at all, it's more damaging. One of the prime problems is that because they don't understand exactly what's going on in these relationships, the therapists tend to blame the victim. Why did you stay? Why? What was your contribution? And well, you must have made a decision to keep going, and things along those lines. They don't understand what I just talked about. They don't understand the oxytocin and how strong that physical compulsion is to stay in the relationship. They don't understand the betrayal bond and how difficult it is to really break away from these situations. One of the things that our research found was that a lot of therapists are telling the clients, or you, the people who've been targeted, that you're codependent. Well, guess what? The symptoms of codependency are almost identical to the symptoms of being traumatized. So what we posited was going on in our paper is that people were actually reacting to trauma, and that's why they were staying in the relationship and doing what they're doing. People talk about the fight or flight syndrome, and then they add on the fight, flight, or freeze, where you just don't do anything. Well, then there's also fight, flight, freeze, and friend. And one of the ways people survive in a situation like this is by trying to make friends with the abuser. And this is where, like, the Stockholm syndrome is related to this. And it's actually a trauma reaction. And a lot of therapists just don't seem to understand that. And consequently, lots of people go for therapy and are disappointed. In fact, they feel worse than when they went in. So my advice is that if you go for therapy and you don't feel like the person understands what you're talking about, just stop going to that professional. Find somebody else. And it might take some time. It might take some trial and error and going through a bunch of people until you finally come across somebody who understands what's going on. Because as I said, half of them don't. So it might take a while to find someone who can offer you appropriate assistance. Dogs are better lie detectors. Yeah, I don't think my dog liked my ex. And I've heard from multiple people that they should have listened to their dogs, that the dog didn't like the person that was involved with them. So the key here, of course, is first of all to know that sociopaths exist, and that's the number one reason why we get stuck in these situations, as I said earlier, is because we don't know that they're out there. But then, of course, the next thing is to learn to trust our intuition, because usually we have some kind of a feeling, some kind of an internal warning that this is not good, this is not right. But because of the way we're brought up in our society with the other things that I talked about, like everybody has good inside and everybody deserves a second chance and we all have our baggage and we don't want to be judgmental and all of these things, for those reasons, we override what our intuition is telling us. And that's how we get in trouble. So, the most important thing is to, first of all, know that they exist. I mean, this is a number one first step to protect yourself. The second step is to know the warning signs of disordered behavior, sociopathic behavior, the red flags. And the third is to trust your intuition. Your intuition, your body, your feelings will always steer you in the right direction. So you really need to pay attention to them and act on what your intuition tells you. Okay, so hello Donna, Susie says. Do you think we fall for them because they are fun to be with? They have personalities that are charming and outgoing, and we are mesmerized by them. Oh, absolutely. Yes, that certainly has something to do with it. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Leanne Leadham, she is one of the authors of the original book, Women Who Love Psychopaths. And she studied what the vulnerabilities are for women. They weren't able to do it for men, but at least for women, to find out, what personality traits or behaviors or points of view, what were the ones that made women at risk. Well, one of them is exactly what you're talking about. The women who tend to get tied up with psychopaths, and this is specifically about psychopaths, but we could probably generalize it to the other conditions as well. They're extroverts. These are women who are outgoing, who want to have fun, who have a lot going on in their lives. They're successful. And the extroversion is the point of contact, the common denominator between the woman and the psychopath. Now most psychopaths and antisocials and narcissists are, as you said, they're extroverted, they're charming. I mean, these are the signs that we usually see. Not always. There's always exceptions. I mean, I've definitely heard people talk about a few who had no charm whatsoever, but that's typically what they have. They have this magnetism. And women who are successful, who are achieving, they may be a professional, running their own business, have a lot going on, artistic, creative, anything like that. Women like that look for a partner who's like them, who is not intimidated by the fact that they're successful or that they make a lot of money or something like that. And so what happens is that a lot of times guys who aren't, quite as secure with themselves, or maybe aren't quite as successful as the women are, they don't want to approach a woman like that. But who's not afraid? It's the psychopaths. The psychopaths, who they'll go up to anybody. So they'll approach a woman like this, and then they've got all this energy. And so this is actually, what the women and the psychopaths have in common is often the extroversion. So that makes perfect sense. Exactly. Okay, so Chanel says, does their inability to handle authority prevent them from actually working? My husband lied about owning a business and never worked. That's the case for some psychopaths and antisocials. They aren't all the same. I mean, there are plenty of sociopaths who cannot deal with authority at all and consequently can't hold a job. There's a lot of things they can't do. But that's not universal. There are plenty of psychopaths who manage to be in a corporate environment, manage to be in a workplace. Sometimes, they're not necessarily good employees, and they're stabbing people in the back, and they're brown-nosing, their bosses and causing all kinds of havoc, or under the radar causing problems. So it's difficult, but plenty of sociopaths have jobs. Plenty of sociopaths work. And plenty of them don't. Plenty of them are scam artists. So yes, that's a possibility, but the point being that not everybody's the same. Not all sociopaths are the same. Okay, so Noreen says, do you think there should be a special class taught at high schools educating and warning teenagers about sociopaths and other people with cluster B personality disorders? Yeah, I do. In fact, I actually have a program that I have presented to high schools in this area in New Jersey, high schools and colleges, and it was amazing. The kids were very interested. They often asked good questions, and one of the things that really struck me was that every time I did a presentation, people came up afterwards and they were already in these situations. I had teachers come up, with their situations, but I definitely had kids come up. And, the thing to keep in mind is that most people who have antisocial personality disorder, their disorder starts to come out with puberty. So, we're talking 12, 13, 14, 15 years old is when this disorder starts to kick in. And so consequently, people in, middle school and high school are often dealing with personality disordered individuals. So, yeah, I would love to see it more widespread. My understanding is, at least here in New Jersey, that there's just so many requirements of things that need to be taught that the school just doesn't have enough time, or they don't have the resources, whatever. But yeah, it's really something that is necessary. Okay, do sociopaths realize that sooner or later their victims will wake up and leave them? Not all victims do. I mean, hopefully they do, but I've definitely heard from people who are so entrenched that they can't escape. For multiple reasons, either their lives are just too intertwined, the money's too intertwined, the family situation's too intertwined, or they've just been broken down so much that they don't have the strength to leave, which is really, really sad. So, plus sociopaths will try and keep their claws into you as long as they possibly can. That's one of the things that they do. It's amazing how when you finally feel like you've had enough and you're really ready to leave, they seem to have this sixth sense to know that. And then all of a sudden, then they're on their best behavior again. And then you say, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad. And you hang in, and then it all starts all over again. The bottom line is, the sooner you can get away from one of these people, the better off you are. Okay, so Josie asks, do you think the sociopath is consciously aware of these manipulation strategies as the relationship is moving along, or is it just innate within them? Probably both. The thing is that sociopaths have been doing this all their lives. In fact, I did a video a few weeks ago related to this, about how sociopaths learn how to do this. And essentially, because they've been doing it all their lives, I mean, I mentioned that some sociopaths, it usually starts to show, the condition starts to appear at puberty, but there are plenty of instances where it starts much younger. I mean, I've heard of people talk about 3- and 4-year-olds who, have the traits of disorder. So in some cases, sociopaths have just been doing it all their lives, so that it becomes second nature. It becomes innate. So it's both. So sometimes they're exactly aware of what they're doing, and I've heard of plenty of cases where, the sociopath had this whole plan and executed it, and got what they wanted. And then sometimes, they're just winging it and doing what come naturally, which for them happens to be manipulation and exploitation. Okay, so, Sociopath Survivor says that when her ex was exposed, he attempted suicide, and because of that, they diagnosed him as bipolar. Yeah. There actually may be an overlap between bipolar disorder and psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder. In fact, my colleague Dr. Leadham estimates that about 10% of people with psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder may also be bipolar at the same time. There's a lot of overlap among these disorders, and just because you have one doesn't mean you can't have another. And in fact, there's this one a combination of schizophrenia and psychopathy, which is called a schizopath, and this is really bad because these people are hearing voices and have no conscience, so there's nothing to put the brakes on. Some really, really bad situations there. But on the other hand, threatening to commit suicide and in some cases attempting to commit suicide is a typical sociopathic strategy. I mean, usually it's to try to keep you under control. I mean, often they're threatening and don't intend to do it, but they want to make you feel guilty and want to make you stay in the web, so they threaten suicide. But sometimes they do it and sometimes they go through with it. And essentially, one of my colleagues described it as, they realize that the game is over, and especially if they're like about to go to jail or to be held accountable, so they say, well, game over, I don't want to play anymore, and that might be a reason why they go ahead and actually commit suicide. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it certainly can happen. Okay, so Chanel says, do you believe it's a mutual con job? We believe we can change them from a disempowered victim state and the sociopath from a falsely empowered state. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of that where, and actually it comes from another one of those things, things that we're taught by society, one of those, pithy sayings that maybe isn't as true as we would like to be true. The saying that, love can overcome anything. Unfortunately, it can't. But we have to realize that, and we have to believe and come to understand exactly what we're dealing with, and understand that, once a sociopath is an adult, there's like practically zero chance that he or she will recover, that the disorder will remit. It just doesn't happen. So that requires changing our own mind and our own outlook, and sometimes that's hard to do. So yeah, in a way, we do fool ourselves and try to keep it going, or keep trying to make it better when it's really hopeless. NC says, how do we convince someone who does not believe her partner is a con man? Yeah. That's really hard, because of one of the things that I talked about previously, like the betrayal bond. I know of some cases where the women were explicitly told exactly what was going on, and they still didn't want to leave the relationship. So what's important in those situations is to maintain contact with your friend or family member, whoever it might be, even though it's frustrating and difficult. Sometimes you just have to wait for them to see it. Recognize how difficult it is. Recognize that the person is trauma bonded, that the person is, their self-esteem is being chipped away. They're being mind controlled. So a lot of things are going on, and essentially sometimes all you can do is wait until they see the truth of their situation, and then help them pick up the pieces. Sometimes that's all you can do. But, recognize that there's an awful lot of psychological and emotional manipulation going on in these situations, and so you might just have to be patient and pray a lot, and do what you can to be supportive of your friend, not necessarily of that person, but of your friend or family member. Okay, so Donna, is there a reason why the borderline person I knew couldn't see herself as the common denominator in 5 failed relationships? Well, borderline personality disorder is in the same cluster of disorders as antisocial and narcissistic and histrionic personality disorders, although the root cause of this disorder isn't the same as the other ones. I always feel sorry for people who have borderline personality disorder, because many of them, especially the women, were sexually abused when they were young, which had something to do with the disorder developing. And often the males, were shamed. So, and the other thing about people with these disorders, with borderline personality disorder, is that often they are suffering. They're conscious of the fact that something is wrong and that they're not happy, which is usually not the case with antisocial or narcissistic or psychopathic personality disorder. And a lot of the folks with those disorders are proud of themselves, for being superior in their point of view. But for borderline, that's a really tough situation. So I would say that she probably needs really good therapy, because if she actually is borderline, I mean, there's a lot of issues that need to be worked on. And people with borderline personality disorders are afraid of abandonment. They're afraid of they want to connect, but they can't really do it, and that's why you see a lot of the same manipulative types of behaviors. But I would say that she definitely should work with somebody, because there's probably a lot to address there. Okay, well, it looks like that's the end of the questions for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this episode of Lovefraud Live, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.